Welcome to another lecture in the Advanced Web Development course. I'm your professor, Dr. English Dowdell. Today we're going to be talking about implementing admin functionalities in web applications. Now, when building web applications, one of the most important aspects is admin functionality, basically allowing certain users to manage content, maybe manage other users and system settings. Now, to implement this properly, we need to securely manage our users, which means understanding CRUD operations, user authentication, and security best practices. So in this lecture, we're going to cover the topics in these three sections. First, we're going to be reviewing the CRUD operations, as they apply to user management. Then we'll discuss how to authenticate users securely using password hashing. And then finally, we'll look at some SQL best practices and security measures to protect our database from attacks. After that, I'll walk you through a demo where we'll implement these concepts within PHP and MySQL. Now, before we dive into authentication, let's first understand the CRUD operations that allow us to manage users in the MySQL database. Now, CRUD stands for create, read, update, and delete. And these are the four basic operations for handling data. Now, in the context of user management, here's how CRUD applies. We create by adding new users, we read by retrieving user information, we update by modifying, say, user details like maybe resetting passwords and things like that, and then delete is basically removing the users. So these are some of the SQL query examples that could be used for creating. We would be inserting into our database table, our users database table, inserting username, password, role. We would read using a select statement. So we'd be reading from the users table. We'd be updating. So for instance, this third example here is updating the password. And then we'd be deleting from our table. So we'd be using the delete command that would delete from our users table. And when you're doing the update and the delete, don't forget you always want to include a where statement because for delete, if you don't do that, then you'll end up deleting all of your records. For the update, you want to be specific about which record you want to update, or else you'll find yourself updating like all the records. Okay, so again, if we look at these, the create is when, say, a new user registers, so we would insert their information into the database. For the read, which is the select statement, say when a user logs in, we would retrieve their information from the database. For update, say if the user again changes their password or maybe something in their profile information, we would update their information. And then for delete, admins might remove maybe inactive or problematic users by maybe deleting them. Okay, so now that we know how to store and manage our users' accounts, let's talk about how to keep those accounts secure with authentication. Now, when a user logs into a web application, we need to verify that they entered the correct credentials. The biggest security risk in authentication now is how passwords are stored. Now, why is storing plain text passwords bad? Well, let's say you have a website with thousands of users and you store their passwords in plain text. Now, if your database is hacked, the attacker can see all of your users' passwords immediately. Even worse, most people reuse passwords across, say, multiple sites, which means a data breach on your site could give hackers access to, say, these users' bank accounts, their emails, and their social media. Now, the solution here is hashing the password. Hashing is the process of converting a password into a scrambled fixed length string. Now, it's a one-way function, meaning that once a password is hashed, it cannot be reversed back to the original. So think of it like making a smoothie, okay? So once you blend all the ingredients, you can't separate them back into whole fruits. That's how hashing works. Once hashed, the original password is gone. Now, using PHP's password hash function allows or helps with this. You know, um, this is a built-in function that will hash passwords securely. Here's an example of how you would actually utilize it. So you have, say, a variable, and then you use the password hash function, this built-in function, and then you would pass it in, um, you know, password default and admin123, which is the actual password. And then it would echo out like whatever that hashed password is. And so this is what it would actually produce. So as you can see, the hashed password looks nothing like the original. Even if, say, the attacker gains access to our database, they can't really see the real passwords. Okay, so now that we know how to hash passwords, let's talk about how we retrieve them securely when a user logs in. So when a user logs in, what we'll do is we'll query the database to check to see if the username exists. But instead of checking a plain text password, we retrieve the stored hashed password, and then we use the password verify to compare it with, say, one that they entered before. So instead of, say, directly comparing the password, we would use as far as this password verify here, which hashes the user's input and then compares it against the stored hash. Now, password verify, it's a built-in PHP function that's designed to, say, verify, again, hashed passwords. Now, it's part of the PHP password hashing API that was introduced into PHP 5.5, and it improved with later versions. Now, this is how it works. So it's going to take two arguments, okay? The plain text password entered by the user, and then the hash word password stored by, in the database. So this is what was entered in the, say, the login form, by the user. And then this is the hash um, password that was stored actually in the database. And so it automatically hashes the entered password, which is this admin 123, using the same hashing algorithms as the stored password, and then it compares the results. And if the password matches, then it returns true. Otherwise, it's going to return false. So we're checking to see, the user, we're pulling the user's information, you know, and then we're also checking to make sure that that password is valid. So, if we weren't able to pull any information, if we weren't able to pull the user information, then this would be false. But both of these have to be true in order for us to be able to, um, allow the user to log in, or in this case, echo out welcome admin. Okay, so we're validating, if the user was found, if they were able to successfully fetch, the username, from the database. And then we're also checking to make sure that password verify is equal to true, that these two, what they entered versus what we, the hashed password, if they're both equal. Now, SQL injection is a technique where, say, an attacker would manipulate an input field in order to bypass authentication or modify the database. So, for example, let's say we write a login query like this one here. Okay. Now, if an attacker enters, you know, single quote, or 1 equals 1 as the username, okay, in place of the username, then the query becomes this. It becomes this statement here, okay? And since 1 equals 1 is always true, then the attacker will be able to log in, say, without a password, okay? So to fix this, we always use prepared statements. So instead of actually, having them feed the username directly into our select statement here, we use our prepared statements that we've talked about, in previous modules. Using the prepared statement here, and then this is going to prevent them from actually inserting, some bogus data, or injecting is what we call it. Something like this where it would always be equal to true, and they'd have unauthorized access to our application. Now, finally, let's go over some best practices for securing user authentication. So one is we use HTTPS, for live applications, especially, ones that we're allowing someone to log in or to enter, secure information, things like that. You want to always use SSL, TLS encryption, and that's going to protect the login credentials. Never store plain text passwords. We've talked about that. So, always hash passwords with using that password hash built-in function. Use prepared statements. So again, this is going to prevent SQL injections by using that question mark placeholder in the SQL queries. And then we always want to implement role-based access control. Admin should have access to user management, but regular users shouldn't have access. Now, here's a quick way to basically kind of restrict admin-only access. So, we would set up roles, with our within our database. And if we're allowing access, someone to log in to say make something that would be a change based on them having admin, then what we would be doing is we'd be checking to see if they are using that role of admin. And if they're not, then we would deny them. So with these best practices in place, our admin functionality is going to be a lot more secure. Now, before we start our demo, I wanted to address something we're going to be doing. In previous demos, we've included our database connection directly within our PHP file that we've been working on. However, best practices is to use a separate file. So instead of writing the database connection directly in every file, writing it in our register file, writing it in our login file, so on and so forth, we're going to create a separate file for these. And this is the reason why. One is it provides reusability. We can include, say, the file, like if we name it db.php, we can include it in many scripts without having to actually rewrite the connection code over and over again into every page that we want to include some kind of database connection. It's also going to make it for easier maintenance. If we need to, say, update the database credentials, we only have to change it in one place, rather than updating multiple files. It's also more for security. The database credentials, they're separate from the main application logic, which reduces the exposure to, say, accidental leaks, in HTML files. And then we do this for scalability. As the project grows, this structure kind of keeps our code organized and manageable. So to use like a database connection file in, say, maybe if we had like I think in our demo, we're going to have like a register.php file. We're going to have a login.php file, or say any other PHP script. We include the whatever the database file name is. So in our case, we're going to be naming it db.php. So we would include db.php file at the top of the script using required. So this is sort of an example here, of how we actually do that. Now, required, what this does is it ensures that the database connection is established before we run any query. So we want to do this, like I said, at the very beginning. And if the DB .php say is missing, or say for instance whatever it is, it can't be loaded, then the PHP is going to stop execution and it's going to display an error. Now this ensures that every script using the database has access to the connection without, again, that redundant code. Now, an alternative to using required is also using the keyword include. Now, in both PHP, both include and require, say, are used to bring external files into a script. But there is a key difference, okay? Required is going to stop the execution. So if the file is missing, um, it's going to stop it. And this is best like if you're using want to insert like critical files like a database connection. If the database connection file can't be found, or there's some kind of error or something like that, then we want to just stop everything. We don't want to keep, because that means if our script depends on a lot of database connectivity, then everything's going to just be throwing an error after error after error. We don't want that. Okay, so that's when we use required. Required is going to stop the execution of the file, if the file is missing. And it's going to be best, like I said, for those critical files. Now, include, all that's going to do is it's going to issue a warning, but it's going to continue the execution, so, if the file is missing, it's just going to, give you a warning, but it's just going to keep going. Okay. This isn't recommended for critical files like the database connections. So the best practice for this is to always use required for like essential files, like for instance, our database connections, as the script shouldn't run without having that database connection. Now, the db .php file that you're going to create, where should it be located? You want to store that in a secure location. Typically, it's outside the web root directory if possible. Um, but we're going to actually include it in our root file for now. But a lot of times what you'll see is they'll include, like outside of the web root, they'll include a file, a folder called includes, and then they place it in there. Okay, but to kind of streamline ours, we're not going to do that today. Um, so basically, like using this, external, say, database connection file, again, like I said, it's going to keep your code organized, it's going to make it a little bit more reusable, and it's going to make it more secure. And by just adding this required db.php in any script, you can instantly like use the database connection without, again, repeating that whole connection code. Okay, so now that we've covered how CRUD operations apply to user management, why password hashing is essential for security, and how to properly authenticate users in PHP, and how to prevent SQL injection attacks, let's now put this into practice with a live demo, where we're going to build out these type of features step by step. Okay, so for this video, we're going to be using our Infinity free account. And what we're going to do is we're going to be creating a um, user registration page to allow users, for us to be able to add a user to our database. And of course, we would put something like this behind as far as the only an admin would be able to get to. Um, we're not going to make it very complex, this particular, for this demo. And then we're also going to create a login page. I just want to show you just the core kind of step by step, some of the scripting. And we're going to use, as I mentioned, we're going to use an external database connection page. Um, so if you follow along with some of the other demos that we did, we had already created a user table, but our user table was basically just something we were doing just to show how you would, add different tables to the database. It doesn't have the fields that we really need. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get into our database, and we're going to delete that existing table, and then we're going to create a new user table that's going to actually have, a field for username and password and so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and go into your account. Okay, so let's go to our MySQL databases. Okay, and let's go ahead and launch our admin, our PHP admin. So this is the table. We're going to replace this users table with a different table. Now we could go in and we could, using like the alter table SQL command and restructure it and things like that. But it's just going to be a lot easier for us to be able to go in and just make our change that we want to make by simply just creating a new table. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to say drop. Okay. Now, when we dropped the table, it did give us a warning because I guess within registrations here, when we created this table, we did have a foreign key. Um, that was using that the ID from the user table, but we're not going to worry about that for this demo. When we get to that portion of the course, then we'll go ahead and reestablish as far as that foreign key and primary key relationship. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and I've provided in the course room the actual create table script, so we're going to be utilizing that. So I'm going to say create table, and it's going to be called users. Okay, and we're going to have an ID, which is going to be an integer. It's going to be auto incremented. This is going to be our primary key. And then we're going to have a username field, which is going to be a varchar of 50. We don't want it to be blank, so we're going to say not null, and we want it to be unique. So these are some constraints that we want our database management system here to enforce for us. And then we're going to have a password, and I'm going to just call it password hash. And because of the fact that we saw when we hashed that password, a simple password, how long, that it was a lot of characters. So I'm going to say 255. Okay, and then we're going to have an email field. And this one, we also don't want it to be left blank, and we want it to be unique. Okay. So again, I have provided the code within the course room. You can go in and actually just kind of copy that and then paste it there and then go ahead and say go. And then now we've got our tables here. So we go back and now we've got that user table, the one that we're going to be utilizing, for our database. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to home, and I want to go into the file manager because now what we're going to do is we're going to be creating the information for the external database connection, the login page, as well as the registration page. So first, before we do anything, I want to use that create my database, my external database connection page. So don't forget we have to place everything within this HT docs folder. And I already had, when we were working on our pages before, I already had like my database connection um, in my sample page. So if you want to just pull that information rather than trying to retype everything, you can go ahead and do that. So I'm going to just utilize this information, and then I'm just going to modify this script. So I'm going to copy that over, and then I'm going to create a new file called db.php. This is going to be my external. Okay, and I'm going to paste this code, and then I'm going to clean this up. And actually, I forgot to paste the most essential part, or I forgot to copy the most essential part, which was the PHP script. Okay, all right. So these were my credentials that I had, and then I did my try. Um, and I created, this was my file here for my new PDO. Let me get rid of these. I don't need any of this. So this is going to be my connection. So it's making the connection here. Okay. And then if it doesn't make the connection, then what I want it to do is I'm going to say die connection failed, and then have that message. Okay, and I don't need any of this either. So this is all that is going to be part of my external db.php file. I made my connection because remember, I don't need to have any scripting to do anything in here because this is going to be used as it's going to be included within my login script as well as my registration script. All I need is just to make the connection. And so that's what this is doing. It's just making that connection. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I'm going to close that out. Okay. Okay, so based on our assignment, if you're watching this as um, part of the course, is that we're going to be creating this user register.php file that's going to handle the user registration. We're going to add fields for username, password, and email. We want to ensure that all the fields are filled out. We're going to be using the filter var for email validation. We're going to hash the password, and then we're going to insert it into our users table. All right, so let's go in and let's create a new file. And this file is going to be called userregister.php. Okay. All right, so one of the things that it did say was that we wanted to create that form. Okay, we want to create a form that's gonna have them enter the username, the email, and the password. This is going to be the registration form. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that first, and then we'll add as far as our PHP information. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to type the core information. You can probably grab this information. I don't want you to have to kind of watch me fumble around with typing because I do type very slow. But let me go ahead and type that information, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so I've got the core web page, and again, a lot of times I'll save this as a template and then just copy it over, however works for you. You would think as much as I've typed in my lifetime that I should type a little faster, but um, I don't. Okay, so that's the reason why I do a lot of pre-typing, in my tutorials. But anyway, so let's go ahead. We want to give this a title, so we'll we'll say user registration. Okay. And then we're going to use a form method for this. So um, we'll say form. The method is going to be the post. Okay. And then the action. Now we do want it to actually use the same form. So, we would maybe say user register.php here. But in earlier lessons, we learned that a better way is to use like the HTML entities and have it actually use the PHP self global to instead of actually naming the um, the registration, the same registration. So just in case you decide to change the name of this file, you don't have to go in and actually change this. So we're going to do that what we learned before, and we're going to say echo HTML entities, and then we use the global variable PHP self and parentheses. Okay, let's just make sure I've got all the right parentheses here. Sometimes I'll type this wrong. Okay, we're good. All right, and then we're gonna, so that'll be the form. Let's close out our form. And again, it's, you can put for this tutorial, if you wanted to just, insert it as user register.php, and instead of actually using this, you could, for testing. But best practice, if you refer back to some of the other tutorials that we did, was to have it use this global variable. Okay, so we're going to create a label. And that label is going to say username. And we're going to use an input text type. Name equals username. We're going to make it required. And then we're going to have a second label, which would be for their email address. Type equals email. Name equals email. This one also required. And then we'll have password. And the input type, of course, is going to be password, so it doesn't show as it types. And again, this will be required. And then to process everything, we're going to have a button, submit button. It says register. All right, so that's gone ahead and saved. And so let's pull that up, and don't forget the way that I'm going to hit the save again. The way that you're going to pull this up is you're going to go, this is going to be your page, and don't forget this is our user registration page. Okay, so here's my page pulled up, and it did, I mean, I could use some CSS and everything to make it look a lot better, but that's not the purpose of this video. So once you finish, once we've gone through everything, then you can go in and you can clean it up and make it look a little better than what it looks like now. Okay, so now that we've got our page here, so let's go ahead and now add our PHP. And so again, we want this to appear before we do the form. Okay, and so first we're going to do our start session. We're going to start our session. So if we're saving anything, to the session, we want, I think we've talked about this in previous videos. But then what we're going to do now is we're going to bring in that file. So that's that DBD file, our connection file. And this is going to include, our database connection. Okay, this is what we're doing there, is we're including our database connection. Okay, now some of this is going to look familiar to what we've had before. What we're going to do is we're going to do an if statement, because we don't want this to execute. We want code to execute not when the page loads, because when the page first loads, it's going to be just a form, and we don't want any code to execute at that point as far as processing our form. But once we say do a form method of post, that's when we're doing that request method, the server request method of post, and then this is when we want to actually execute our code. Now we place this outside of that code, and that's fine, because if we don't have a connection to our database, remember I told you required is saying if it fails, or if it can't find that file, say this db.php file, if it can't find that file, then it's going to stop execution of this page. And that's what we want, because if we can't find the file, that means we can't connect to the database, which means there's no sense of having a form here. Okay, so that's the reason why we've got that outside. That's fine. Okay, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to kind of pause the video, type a little bit, and then kind of explain again. I don't want you to have to just kind of watch me type and fumble. Okay, so let me I'm going to type a little bit, and then we're going to go over it, and then I'll type a little bit more and we'll go over it. So what we're doing here is we're saying, if this is if the request method is a post, which means that this form got processed. They hit the submit button here, and this form actually got processed. Remember, there is always a request method. Okay, just pulling up a page is going to be that get request method, but actually processing the form is going to be that post method. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is sanitize and validate the input. So we're going to, have, as far as the username, we're going to get the trim down whatever they put into the username, and you could do a lot more validation of this if you want to, but I'm just kind of keeping this demo simple right now. And then we're checking the validity, not the validity, but the format of the email address that they've provided, just to make sure it follows a certain format, with the @ sign and so on. And then we're grabbing the password that they entered and actually saving these into these variables. And then we're checking the variables to make sure that they have, that they're not false. Okay, if this email wasn't, anything wasn't valid, it would become false. If, it's not empty or false, then if any of these are true, then we're saying that all fields, we're going to be echoing out a message that says all fields are required and email must be valid, and then we're going to exit out. Okay, so now let's now that you know that it's not empty, then let's go ahead and let's continue. Okay, so then the next step is going to be to actually hash that password. Remember, we don't want to store the password in, just whatever they type. We want to hash it so that, it doesn't, so that it's no risk for us if someone accesses our database, that password is not clearly, visible. Okay, so remember we use the built-in function, this hash password hash function. We feed in what they actually typed in with this other parameter here, and then we're saving it in this variable. Okay, so now we're going to create a try catch, and this is going to be the script that we're going to be using that's going to actually be going in, querying our database, inserting the new user information into our database. So just like we did before, we do a try catch. We attempt some scripting. If it doesn't work, then we want to catch the exception and we want to display, some kind of error message or something like that. All right, so now let's go ahead and so the first thing that we're going to do, and we're going to check to see if the username or the email exists already, because remember, we want this to be unique, so we don't want to have somebody registering the same username or the same email over and over. So let's first, we're going to check that. Okay, so this is our code. So we're going to have a parameter called, a variable, we call it check query. And what we're doing is we're doing a select statement into our users table where either the user, and we're feeding in, say, where username is equal to username or email is equal to email. Okay, so we're going to be using a prepared statement like we talked about before. And what we're doing is we're feeding in the variables that they provided, the values they provided for us, and from these variables. So we're feeding in a username and password. So literally what we're doing is we're checking to see that either the email that they provided us matches something. We're looking to see if we can select a record where the email is the, matches, or that the username matches. Okay. Because if either one of those matches, then we can't use it. And so then we go ahead and we execute that prepared statement. And then, if it is able to fetch something, if there is actually a record that it fetches, then we're going to feed back a message that says username or email already exists, and then we're going to exit out of this. So this is how we're going to check to see if either the email or the username already exists. If either one already exists, then we're not going to allow them to be able to use it, and we're not going to go any further in our script. Okay, so now that we've checked that out and say it didn't exist, there wasn't a username or an email address already in the database. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and insert our information into the database. So again, we're using the insert, SQL method, and we're inserting the username, the password hash, and then email, and then the values. And we're again using a prepared statement, so that people can't just do some kind of, injecting or anything like that. And then once this executes, then we're going to output a message that says registration successful. You can now log in, and then we'll have a link to our login page. Okay, and so that's it for our registration page. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and we'll be testing this in the end just to make sure everything works properly. All right, so now let's go in and let's build our login page now that we've got the registration page. Okay, so again, if you're building this in relation to the course, um, in the course it says that we're going to create a login page to handle user login. We're going to add fields for username and password. We're going to validate that all the fields are filled out, and then we're going to verify the credentials using a select statement using the password verify so that we can compare the password that they've entered with the hashed password. So let's go in and say new, and we call this login PHP. Okay, and we can start by again building out that our web page portion, which is going to be our login screen. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, and we'll do login. And we're just going to have, now you can have other text if you want it here. I'm just going to have form, and it'll be post and the action. And just to simplify it, to show you that it works, you know, even if you put the actual file name here, because again, we're going to be using the same, we're going to be using the same screen. So we'll go ahead now. If you want it, because this login screen or this login page is going to be the one that's going to be verifying. So, you know, I'm going to go ahead and use this here. And let's close our form out. Okay, so I'm going to place two text boxes. One is going to be for the username and the other is going to be for the password. Okay, so I've got my label, username, and the name is going to be username is going to be required um, based on the instructions. Password also required. Okay, and then I'm going to have a button which is going to be my login button. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add our script for actually processing this form. Okay, and just as we did before, we're going to do our session start, and then we're going to include our db.php file. Oops, include database connection. Okay. All right, so again, this is something we don't want this script to run unless they've actually clicked on the form and submitted the form. So we have to, again, make sure that we're checking that the server request method was a post as opposed to a get, because a get, remember, you know, just loading the page would do that. So let's do that first. Okay, so again, we're checking to make sure that it was a post back. Okay, and then we're taking what they entered into the username and the password, storing it in the variables, and then just checking to make sure that information was added. If it wasn't, if either of these is false, then we'll say, you know, both fields are required, and then have them have it exit and not go any further. But if then we're going to do our try catch. Okay, so we put our try catch that there again, you know, catching it if there's some kind of issue. All right, so what we want to do is we want to, based on the username that they gave us, we want to go ahead and we want to run a query of the database so that we can pull the information from the database. And then we're going to compare the password that we pull with the password that they entered. And that's how we're going to check to make sure that they entered the correct thing. So we'll go ahead and let's say we're going to retrieve the user data. That's the first thing we're going to do. Okay, so let me go ahead and do that. Okay, again, remember we're always going to be using this prepared statement, especially because we're dealing with, user information and logging folks on and so on and so forth. Okay. All right, so next, now that we've pulled the information, what we want to do is we want to verify that the password matches, the password that was entered, and we're going to be using that password verify that we talked about in the earlier in the lecture. Okay, so we're checking, that they added that the username was found, as well as that comparing the password that they've entered with the hashed password, and we're using that password verify in order to do that. And so if all of that is successful, then we want to store the information into a session, so that if we need to be able to utilize it later, the username. And then this allows us to be able to do things like hello, whatever the username was, type thing. Okay. And then we're able to we can echo out, maybe login successful. And we say, welcome. And we would utilize that that username that they provided us. So I'm going to do special characters. Okay. Now, if, say, this doesn't pass the test, if it's not the same, then I'm going to have an else statement. And I'm going to tell it something like invalid username or a password. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. Okay, real quick, when I was looking over my code, I noticed I had missed a in parentheses within my db.php file. So if you copied exactly the way that I had it, please go back and fix this, because I opened up as far as the parameter for the die, but I forgot to close it. So make sure that you go in and do that. I also noticed that I misspelled password in my password hash, and this is going to affect my select statement. So, again, just be careful when you're typing. Programming is very precise. You have to have things precise. So I'm going to go in and actually change that. So I'll add the extra S onto that. Okay, and I'm just going to make sure I've got everything else the way that it's supposed to be. Yes, programming is very precise, you guys. So, you want to be careful, when you're typing and things like that. Usually I'm a little bit more careful, but I guess I'm trying to kind of instruct and explain as I type. And so Sometimes that gets a little bit much. Now, for some reason, I'm running into issues with saving to my database. Um, So what I do as far as troubleshooting, because what's happening is it's telling me this page isn't working, which means that I've got an error somewhere on my page, and I'm not sure exactly where that error resides. So what I usually do, which is kind of the long way of doing it, but it just helps me, is that I will um, comment out like parts of my page just to see what's actually working. So that's what I'm doing now is I'm commenting out this whole selecting, interacting with the database portion just to be sure that this portion up here is working correctly. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And then I'm going to run my page again and see if I get an error with that. If I don't get an error with that, then I'll maybe uncomment out maybe the hash part. Maybe this is causing the issue, and then if that runs with no problem, then I'll try commenting out, uncommenting as far as the selection. So let me do that, and then I'm going to let you know what I found in my troubleshooting. Okay, so I think I see what the problem is and I kind of fixed it. So, and I want you to look and make sure that you didn't make the same mistake I did. So remember, this is our db.php file, okay? And I'm storing the connection, I'm opening the new PDO connection and storing it in this variable here. Before, this was not the name of the variable. I was using a variable that I had used before. But I changed it to this variable because this is the actual variable that I'm using within my script. So this has to match what's in your script. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So before it was my PDO. I think that was the name of the variable, okay? And it wasn't matching up. So I changed it to use DB, okay? So take a look at your file, make sure that if you copied exactly the way that I copied, change this in your db.php file to this variable name, okay? Now let me show you where I actually utilized it so that is this what page is this? No, this is not what I wanted. User registration. Okay. All right. So here, when I'm doing my prepared statement, see, I'm calling that connection. Okay. So this has to match. Okay. Because again, here it is here. So rather than changing it all throughout on my entire script, I just went ahead and changed it because again, what we're doing is we're including that file, that db.php, we're including that script basically in this file. We're like saying insert it, it needs this. And so if I'm using that variable to open my connection, then I've got to use that same variable throughout my script when I'm interacting with my connection. Okay. Now I want to show you something else. Normally this here, I kept getting like a very generic error. And that's because Infinity Free hides like the errors and it gives you like this 500 generic error. If you want to have it give you the exact issue that's going on, then place this at the beginning of your script. Make sure you take it out before you actually like launch it for public to see it. But while you're troubleshooting, this is going to be helpful to have in here because it's going to actually display the real message, the real errors, rather than that 500 error that Infinity Free has it doing. So I'm going to leave that there for now. But before I were to say launch this for public viewing, or even for my stakeholders to view, I would go ahead and hide that and take that out. Okay, so another thing I want to do now, I went ahead and I did a registration and it told me that my registration was successful and now I can log in. So what I want to do is I'm going to go into um, and I want to see. So yes, you see my what I inserted into the registration actually got inserted into my database. And look at that password hash. Of course, you know that's not what I entered. Okay, so this works. So that user registration actually works. So go in and try to see if you can register um, with that user registration and see if it saves the data directly to your database. And again, adding this at the top, if it keeps giving you errors and like I was doing, commenting out certain things just so that I could figure out. And this is what it narrowed down to, that it was something in this script. And then when I looked at this, I says, oh, okay, that's not the variable that I used in my database connection file here. And so that's the problem. And then, of course, it did tell me, alluded to that with this error messaging. Okay, so go ahead and like I said, test your user registration form and make sure that everything works correctly and see that it registers something. Okay. Okay, so I forgot what the password was that I used. Unfortunately, our app doesn't have a forgot password, but what we could probably do is do a reset password. Um, send them an email, have them reset it. So I actually had to create another additional username. So when you go to test, make sure you write down the password that you used for your test user. Okay, because again, you can't look in that database and see it because it's hashed. Okay, so let me go in and I'm going to show you what happens when you successfully log in. And so see, log in successfully, welcome, and then we took the username that we had saved in our session, and then we greeted the user. Okay, so anyway, that is how we would create sort of an admin. Of course, this is very, very simplistic. You would do a little bit more, like I said, maybe have a way for them to be able to not retrieve their password because, again, remember hashing is a one-way street of doing the way that we're doing it. But we can allow them to be able to reset their password by maybe sending them an email since we do have their email address. But this is a simple way of creating a login and a user registration. So this is how you will be completing the milestone. So again, go in and test it. Test both of your forms. Make sure that you record what your password is so that you're not having to create multiples like I did. And then that's what you would be, turning in. So you'll be submitting the URL to the live registration. Um, and to the login pages and then zip up all of the files and submit that. Okay, other than that, happy coding.